Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are learning how to keep the king safe with your castle pawns. If you've already checked my previous video about opening principles, you know that it's important to castle fast to keep your king safe. Now we are learning how to keep your king safe after castling, and this chapter is about how to place your pawns in front of your king. And this is already the first example. Here clearly white is attacking the black king. You can see that with a few characteristics of that position. First, there are many white pieces ready to attack. There's a queen here, there's this rook, this knight, and also this other rook can move quickly to another square. And even this bishop is actually well placed here on c4 and can possibly switch to d3 where it can also attack. On the other hand, black has a slightly weak square on g6 because of this pawn move h6, and more importantly, there are not so many black pieces ready to defend the black king. Here there is just this knight on f8, arguably a good defending knight, but apart from that, there is no black piece that is able to rush quickly to the king's side to defend the king. Okay, let's see how the attack went from that position. It started with a nice rook sacrifice. Rook takes g7, king takes g7, and then white makes a quiet move, rook to h3, and you can see that it won't be possible for black to defend this pawn. There is no piece that is able to move fast enough to defend that pawn. So black plays f6, and black's hope here is to be able to move the king to f7 and then e8 to be able to reach the queen side. If the black king manages to reach the queen side, maybe he will save the game. Maybe. So white plays queen takes h6, check, king f7, but now there is this terribly weak square on f6 that can be captured by the knight. And this is very sad for black because now this f6 knight controls e8 and there is no more escape for the black king. So this position is honestly completely lost for black. Black tries to move the rook to d7 to move that king maybe to e7, but this is already too late, and this very quiet move, rook to g3, threatening queen g7, against which there is actually nothing to do, proves that white is winning here. Black has no relevant move and plays c takes d4, and now white delivers checkmate on g7. Black is checkmated in this position, and what's interesting in this attack is that white used some weak squares around the black king to fuel the attack. And here clearly this knight on f6 found a very good square, and it's possible only because of that rook sacrifice at the beginning that cleared the control of the f6 square for white. This is the standard pawn structure around the king. You can see that there is no weakness here as no pawn has moved yet. So this is really the ideal pawn structure for your king. Now, if you move your f pawn forward, it may not look a lot, but your king is already a lot weaker here actually. And the danger can come from this diagonal here. For instance, a black bishop could come here and deliver a nasty check on c5, for instance, like in this example. And moving this pawn to f3 also weakens the e3 and g3 squares a lot. And weak squares around your king means that your opponent can use them to attack you, as we've seen in the previous example. So you want to avoid creating weak squares for your opponent. Now, if you move the h pawn, it's probably not quite as bad as if you move the f pawn, yet it weakens the g3 square here. And it probably does not look that bad because this g3 square is still controlled by the f2 pawn. Yet in some very specific configurations like this one, you see that the f pawn is pinned by the bishop, and this knight can actually come to g3 despite the f pawn. So moving that h pawn made a difference in that situation. It created a weak spot on g3. Of course, if you don't move your h pawn, there is no problem anymore, because if black moves the knight to g3, well, white captures. That was easy. The last pawn you can move in front of your king, and the one that probably creates the most weaknesses, is the g pawn. Here this pawn has moved to g3, which means that two weak squares have been created on f3 and h3. And again, weak squares mean that there is an opportunity for your opponent to attack. This is probably the worst that can happen to you with white. If black puts a pawn on f3 and the queen on h3, well, you're just checkmated on the next move. Now, besides the pawns, a nice piece to defend your king is always the knight, and f3 and f3 is an ideal square to protect your king. This is also true if you castle long. The best defender of the castle is also usually the knight on c3 here, which means that in some situations your opponent might want to exchange this knight. It can happen in particular with the bishop on g4. And moreover, if you're not able to recapture on f3 with a piece, not only does your opponent remove the defender, but it also weakens your pawn structure a lot. Let's look at that. Black captures on f3, you recapture, and here what do you have? You have three weak pawns. None of them can be defended by another pawn. f3, f2 are double pawn. You know that this is a weak configuration, and this h pawn is very weak as well. And worse, f3 and h3 are weak spots in your position that your opponent can use to put pieces and to attack you. Now let's have a look to a real game that illustrates this issue of weak pawns in front of your king. It starts with a classical Italian game: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and bishop c5. This is usually a very quiet line, but here this game won't be quiet. White castles, not very ambitious, but solid. d6, d3, this is the Giuco pianissimo, not a very ambitious line usually. Knight to f6, black continues playing symmetrically. Knight to c3, bishop g4 by black, which is a very ambitious and double-edged move already. And now white plays the routine bishop g5, but it is actually not such a good move. At first sight, this position is very symmetrical. You can say that both knights here are pinned, so you could probably assume that there is a proximate equality here. But there is a big difference, because here, if black manages to dislocate this pawn structure, white is in trouble because his king is behind those pawns. Whereas, on the other hand, if white captures on f6 and dislocate this pawn structure, black is not that much in trouble because black has not castled yet. This makes a big difference. For this reason, white's correct move was, for instance, a move like bishop e3 and not bishop g5, because black has a strong reply here, and this is knight to d4. What's the threat here? Very simple. Now this knight is pinned and threatened twice. It means that white cannot recapture on f3 with the queen. And now white replies with knight to d5, only making things worse, because black now plays knight takes f3 check. Black has to capture on f3. Bishop to h3, attacking this rook on f1. White continues playing the same moves, probably thinking that he's okay, whereas actually white is in big trouble here. Knight takes f6 check, g takes f6, and now bishop h4. And now white's idea is that, and now probably white has seen that black has a nice activity on the g file, So white is thinking, if black gives me a check on the g file, well, it's not that bad because I'll be able to put that bishop on g3 and okay, I'll be more or less okay. So if we evaluate this position, black has a threat to win the exchange on f1, and black has also a potentially strong attack coming on the g file. And black has actually something stronger than capturing on f1. This is a brilliant move, f5. Wow, black is offering his queen, but what's the idea behind this move? White captures on d8, and now rook to g8, and suddenly white understands, because now that this bishop is on d8, it's no longer able to parry the check efficiently. And the following moves are forced. King h1, bishop g2 check, king g1, forced, bishop takes f3 check, bishop g5, the last desperate move, and rook takes g5, checkmate. What a nice attack by black. And back to this position, black is already much better here. The reason is that black threat is on the castle pawn structure, whereas white's threat on the kingside pawns actually helps black to have a strong attack. To sum up, you always have to pay attention to the pawns in front of your king. Move them carefully and only if you have a good reason, and also be very careful of exchanges that could deteriorate your pawn structure, as we've seen in that previous example. Things can go really bad really fast. Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope you found it useful. In the next video, we'll start looking at what makes a piece good or bad, and we'll start with the king. What makes the king good or bad? Thanks for watching this video. Put a blue thumb if you enjoyed it. I hope to see you very soon on a new video. Bye bye!